So what is AfrikaBurn? It's a good question, with a variety of different answers. AfrikaBurn is definitely the spectacular result of a creative community that gathers in an isolated semi-desert environment. It's entirely participant-created, and it is by design resource scarce, which requires adapting our thinking and doing and finding innovative solutions to the myriad of challenges that present themselves. Each year, a temporary city is built and returned to dust. And it's done so on the foundations of 11 guiding principles, one of which being leave no trace. AfrikaBurn has always been cognizant of its environmental impact, and the climate emergency has always been a factor in the rollout of our event management and logistics, because we operate in an extreme environment with adverse weather conditions. In 2018, when Cape Town's taps threatened to run dry, and we were fast approaching our water day zero, the municipality restricted our consumption to 50 litres per person per day. But in the midst of this, it was our 12th event in Tankwa Town, and the temporary AfrikaBurn community were already well versed in water management, with a guideline of a minimum consumption of 5 litres per person per day. It was also the year that we changed course with our sanitation solutions. With our rapid event growth, the number of compost pit toilets we were digging each year was increasing to a point where we would be triggering an environmental impact assessment. And so we sought to do better, to be regenerative rather than sustainable. In collaboration with an expert community member, we found a new solution that would enable us to leave a better trace in the long run. Our new thrones became movable toilets containing organic compounds that aid rapidly decompose human waste, so it can be converted into human manure. With all creative content and artistic activities being participant-generated, much of the organising of AfrikaBurn revolves around cajoling and guiding and supporting our community, including to pay attention to their carbon footprint. Our art incubation processes strongly encourage artists to examine the environmental impact of their creative works. We assess projects through this lens and guide artists towards second-hand equipment, repurposing of offcuts, using waste materials and alien vegetation, and encouraging collaboration with others for pooling resources. But what about artistic expression and content and creativity? That too, over the years, has been cognizant of climate change. In 2012, which was my first AfrikaBurn, I was involved in taking a collaborative art project to the event as part of Mzansi Carnival, a year-round intercultural project involving the diverse communities of Cape Town's South Peninsula. Prior, in December 2011, the environmentally focused Mzansi Goes Boss theme coincided with COP17 held in Durban, where US artist John Quigley orchestrated the composition of an aerial photograph of children arranged in the shape of a lion's head on the beach. At AfrikaBurn, John Quigley worked with an image of a single line drawing by Sydney Ryan, with Mzansi Carnival corralling a human chain through mobilising a parade with recycled puppets, percussion and dance. The result was an aerial image of Madiba's face that was created using a continuous line of seated participants. One of the most striking and iconic artworks at AfrikaBurn was the statement against the threat of fracking, hydraulic fracturing in the Karoo, called Subterrafuge by Nathan Victor Honey. This artwork actually stood for 2 events in the desert unable to burn in the first year due to inclement weather. The colour blending with the landscape a reference to the deceit and hidden truths employed by the companies seeking to exploit the Karoo. The scale, the tallest cone structure at 30 metres, representing the physical depth proposed for fracking. When it burned in its second year, purposefully, no accelerant was used for the ignition. Honey's works are also good examples of working with waste, offcuts and alien vegetation, using only new materials for the structural elements, for example, Project O's spiral staircase. It's also worthy to note that the burning of an artwork has to be motivated as part of the concept. The majority of artworks do not in fact burn. The Dung Beetle project has showcased gasification technology that converts single-use plastic into fuel that powers a soundstage. Ostensibly another soundstage, the design of the watering hole was conceptualised around an experiment to see if dew could be harvested in the Tankwa during the event week. Some participants have set up solar charging stations as educational community services. The power of the sun is a gift from a guy known as Solar Santa, who first came to AfrikaBurn in 2018. it was one of the first public solar power stations in Tankwa Town. Being a participant-created event, much of the organisation's efforts also involves holding a line. One mechanism we employ is quite simply peer pressure, by publishing a moot map after each event. The status of each camping and artwork site is taken into account when assessing the good standing of creative crews for future engagements and projects. Moot means matter out of place, and errant costume elements are prime suspects. There are no peacocks at Kwaggafontein. We are very aware how we as a community can do negative impact on the environment. And there are hard choices to be made when staging an event in such a remote location, where the location itself is a foundational element of the event's curation. It's a fine balance. But we encourage discussion, debate, and action with regards to being regenerative in our local environment. Having an airport and allowing small aeroplanes to fly participants to the event site can be considered an excessive use of fossil fuels. On the flip side, it facilitates our capability to provide emergency aero-medical evacuation, something as organised as we deem necessary at well over 200 kilometres to the nearest provincial hospital. International participants flying into South Africa and creative crews trucking their equipment into a remote location for a week or so massively increases the carbon footprint. And yet we have great success in encouraging people to buy local. We will be undertaking a carbon audit for the event cycle to identify in more detail where the challenges lie and where we can do better. We also need to find where we draw our own line, as we cannot feasibly calculate what 12,000 participants would be consuming otherwise during that week if they weren't at AfrikaBurn. So what happened in 2022 as we begin to bounce back better? The lay of the land is that our Department of Public Works, the event construction crew, arrives first and they are on site for about 3 months. The team goes from an initial 15 people to around 60 ahead of the event, and then the full crew is around 260 during its peak time for a period of about 10 days. This year, our recycling team processed well over 20 tonnes of crew-produced waste that was saved from landfill. Our 2022 event was also our first event in the Western Cape, having moved from the Northern Cape in 2020. So instead of continuing to take the recycling to Cape Town in the future, we're working with the Witzenberg municipality to identify recycling centres more locally. And going back to those toilets, at the event we harvested approximately 800 litres of effluent per toilet. This was treated with enzymes and moved to a holding tank for a period of 2 months after the event. It's then worked into wood chips to create human manure. We currently have approximately 40 cubic metres of wood chip that we are using to process around 104,000 litres of effluent. Our aim is to use some of that processed human manure for our seed bombing experiments as part of our habitat regeneration programmes on Kwaggafontein that we intend to launch next year. This year, the Tree of Stories, which is a semi-permanent artwork, was built using solar power alone and combined solar panels in its design. The crew shared the power supply with other participants, including the time post-event during cleanup. And where do we go from here? With the advent of becoming custodians on Kwaggafontein Farm, we've made some foundational changes to the homestead area as a microcosm of what can be achieved in the annual event. The homestead can currently house 50 people without burning any fossil fuels to generate electricity. We've built 2 dry composting toilets that have generated 4 large bins of compost in just over a year. And a food tunnel has also been constructed to grow seasonal vegetables with the use of borehole water and is maintained by using compost that's generated from food scraps from our kitchen. This was achieved with funding that we secured for some basic infrastructure to springboard regenerative projects and a team of willing volunteers. The homestead is also a resource for field workers as a host of the Hotbirds Research Project, which studies desert species to understand and predict their responses to climate change. Starting at home, we are learning the skills necessary so we can adopt better systems in all of our areas of operations at AfrikaBurn towards regeneration. Watch this space and participate.